Well, here we are again, folks. Welcome to another episode of Awareness Explorers. And I'm very excited to have a guest explorer who we'll introduce in a moment. But first, how are you doing, Brian?
Excellent, Jonathan. I'm really looking forward to this.
Excellent. People don't use that word enough. That's an excellent word.
I like it.
Well, yeah. Well, we're honored and excited to have Susanne Marie, a spiritual teacher and a wonderful human being that I've talked to before. And we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but partly her experience of living with not having a sense of self. But first, let me say how I got to know Susanne Marie, because it's an interesting story. I was talking to Rick Archer of the Buddha at the Gas Pump podcast. I asked him, who have you interviewed or who have been some of your favorite guests? And he said, well, somebody I really, really liked was Susanne Marie. And I said, well, gee, I haven't heard of her. So Rick said, well, I think she's actually lives in the same town you live in. So I contacted her because anytime you can spend time talking to people who have had awakening experiences, I think that's good for you. So we met. I think we talked for 2 or 3 hours, and Susanne Marie, you were very generous with your time, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So when I was thinking of who I'd like to talk to about the experience of no self, you were number one on my list. So welcome to Awareness Explorers.
Oh, it's so nice to be here with both of you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Well, you know, we mostly follow our curiosities, so the general topic might be one of no self and how your transition came to that. But feel free to also say anything that you think might be useful to our listeners who are basically trying to awaken and integrate awakening experiences into daily life.
Sure.
But I want to let you begin, Brian, because Susanne Marie and I have talked some, and you're new to this wonderful being. So what comes up for you?
Well, thank you. You know, when I was looking at your website and I was reading several of the articles in there, particularly one called The Dissolving of Self and another one called Unbounded Freedom, and they really went to one of my main curiosities, which is, what is the separate self? Is it an illusion? And if so, how do we see through this illusion? And so I'm very curious about that from all different angles, including your experience of it and how others might see through this illusion. So first of all, is the separate self an illusion? And how so?
Well, language creates a lot of meaning
Yes.
and definition, as you know. So if we didn't have that, the language of separate self, how would we be defining an aspect of ourself that maybe feels out of sync? Maybe we'd have different ways of relating to it. Maybe we'd say feeling disconnected, feeling disconnected from the whole. Some pain, maybe he's feeling some pain, some suffering, rather than creating a feeling of as if there's an entity that is the separate self. And now there's the separate self, and now, like when we start to develop spiritually, and at times we feel for instance, the inner unification, and the feeling of separate self falls away, and then maybe that feeling reemerges. We would maybe use different kinds of words. So it's not that the word is bad or anything like that. It's just that when we start to create we create more separation out of solidifying the idea of a separate self. Does that make sense?
Yes. So In other words, by talking about it that way, we create a concept of a thing.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
therefore it is separate from other things, and we are separate from each other in that way.
Yeah, very, very, very true. That's how it is. And then we start to have a relationship, positive and negative, with that thing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
That we
and
created
maybe
through language.
through language.
Hmm.
Exactly. Yeah, we created it through language. Mm.
And since we live mostly, especially in Western culture, in our head, the language that we create becomes kind of our reality after a time. We're not looking at the
Mm,
actuality in the moment, we're just relating to concepts.
that's true. And we relate to ourselves as a concept, as you know,
Mm.
and see ourselves as an object within
You know,
awareness.
I had a very interesting experience this last week. I was at a meditation retreat.
Mm,
And at some point during the meditation retreat, you know, you have breaks, you meditate for a few hours. And after one of the meditations, the best way I could describe it is I had no sense of self, which is an unusual experience for me.
mm,
And I realized something was different, so I was trying to understand what was different. And I like tried to think about my past. And it was almost like painful. I couldn't go there.
mm.
You know, it just seemed like my mind wouldn't go there, and I couldn't go into the future. I was just there. And then somebody came up to me and started talking to me,
Mm.
and I'm like appreciating how wonderful a being this is. I'm just there with her. At some point in the conversation, I realized she was talking about my books and how they had impacted her life. And she was telling me, and I started laughing because she thought she was talking to the author of these books. And I had no relationship to that person whatsoever.
Mm.
So I just started giggling, and it struck me as ludicrous that she saw a connection where I didn't. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering, for you, what's it like? I know that at one time you've been a spiritual seeker for a long time, and at one time you went into what you called unity consciousness, and then that changed to what might be called no self. And I'm wondering how you would describe your experience as different than, you know, 30 years ago, maybe, when you were living like you were a self. How would you describe that transition or the difference between those two experiences?
Yeah, that's a good question. Uh, First of all, yes, there was a feeling of self, but it never felt completely true. It always sort of had an off feeling, and I um, I was aware at a young age that there was something that was off and didn't feel right.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't have the non-dual language, like it didn't feel true, you know, but it didn't feel right. And it was kind of like what I was describing with Brian about, without the language, without definition of separate self, we just have different kind of maybe feeling words, you know. Something feels off, you know, I don't feel completely at ease, you know. So
Hmm.
that had been part of my teenage years and very early adulthood, and then it led me to to seek the wholeness that I would drop into now and then. I mean, the only way we know we're feeling off and not feeling, you know, the seamlessness of reality, which is our natural state, is by having known it at some point. You have to have a reference point. Otherwise, what are you seeking? You're only seeking something that you already know,
Yeah.
or else you wouldn't know to seek. it just would be, the state, the current state. So now I'm thinking I'm forgetting that question of yours. So what was it again?
Well, I'm basically asking, how would you say your experience has changed over time? And what is it like, from your perspective, to not have a sense of self and live your life?
Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay. So I was going backwards in order to be able just to, for those who haven't heard any of my other interviews about my earlier life, that I wasn't solidified in the separate self. It just never wanted to take. And so I started early, to want to undo and come back to what many of us call the natural state. So there was a sense of unity. There was a sense of knowing what unity is, because there had been a kind of a flow of going in and out of it throughout my childhood and early adulthood. And so when I would leave that seamless field of awareness and come back to feeling the dissonance of the separate self, it would hurt. So that's what I was trying to point to, that created a seeker to want to return home. I think that's the best use of a seeker. A seeker is a wonderful thing when used in a constructive way.
Yeah.
It takes you back home. So I did all kinds of things, and to meditation and yoga and all kinds of things. And unity eventually solidified. So the sense of seamlessness, we have different types of awakenings along the way. There's not just one. But so unity solidified. And with unity, there is the sense of non-separation. So you can still differentiate and still be able to sense what's yours and what's theirs, and and here and there, and objects and all that stuff. But there's a field that where you feel the molecules you feel one with the molecules of everything, even if there's a difference. So I lived in that unity state for probably 8-9 years before then this no self thing took place.
Is it hard to function in that state? Like drive a car?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a kind of an adjustment period that can take place, with every shift of consciousness. There's an adjustment period, and depending on how radical a shift it is, it's kind of like taking, the old record players and taking the needle from one song and putting it all the way over here to another place. It's kind of like, you're somewhere else, and you have to kind of adjust to the new, what's happening there with that song. So, but some people, it happens, it can happen so many ways that we lean and grow into unity kind of sometimes very gently, like waves coming to a shore, very gentle waves, and we barely notice, that the shore is slowly being taken away by these waves.
Yeah.
So it can happen very slowly. But sometimes even there, like with me, it was happening gradually, more and more seamlessness, was feeling more at ease within my being, and realizing there really is no separation between myself and the outer reality. And then sometimes a big, wave, a rogue wave will come and go and crash, and then it'll take a bunch of land away. And that would be like, for me, the moment when unity really kicked in. It never did a back and forth, never did a, mostly in and sometimes out, or sometimes in, mostly out, kind of, or
Yeah.
whatever, wherever you are on
You
the
weren't
spectrum.
oscillating anymore.
Right. And when it was done, it was kind of like, it didn't ever return. So that shift was significant enough to have to adapt to. And, you adapt. That's what we do, especially when we have context. Context is very important, meaning a good teaching is maybe a helpful teacher or a sangha or something. Context.
Mm-hmm.
So, so once I adjusted to that, but see, we have to remember and realize that unity is a very pleasant change in consciousness. And so it's not like, oh, where did my old state go? It's not like we're vying for it again. It's more, as far as experiences go, it's like the best in terms, it's a beautiful way to live. It's our natural state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I adapted to that for a very long time, and that was wonderful time. And I'm happy to talk about that. But you asked about then the no self, going into no self, which I didn't term that. I didn't make that term up. Actually, that term came from Bernadette Roberts.
Uh-huh.
That term probably was used thousands of years in different ways. But to specifically point to something that I think we're just kind of catching up evolutionarily, spiritually, to the possibility of what spirituality is meant to point to the whole time. And we just kind of lose sight of it, that there really is no separate self and there's no I that resides here. They say that in almost all traditions, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There's no I, whether it's spirit or, whatever, but there's no personal I. And when that foundation, when it's really through and through emptied out, that is a huge change in consciousness.
I think a lot of people worry that if they lost their sense of self, that their life or everything would fall apart and they wouldn't be able to do anything. And it was actually a thought for me too. So it was interesting to see this experience this past week, and in other times that life goes on fine, actually much better usually, without self-referencing, and life flows through one. A strong sense of self is not needed really to get things done. But I'm wondering how you would say how decisions get made.
Well, I'm glad you had that experience. It's like we get these tastes in order to help rewire the nervous system and the brain, and to also bring some calmness to the mind, and also to point for the body that it functions quite well without mind playing a huge part. That something else, some other kind of intelligence kicks in and it knows exactly what it's doing. So I think that we get dips, and tastes of this, and eventually it makes that shift permanently. So, and by then, so if it does that back and forth and gently, the more it's nice. That's a nice, graceful way to enter new territory. It's like going to a totally new country, or maybe another planet.
Another planet, yeah.
So if you were just propelled to that other planet, maybe we wouldn't fare so well. But if we get little visitations, and then get back home, and longer visitations, we start to get in sync and realize that everything's fine there. So decisions are being made anyway by life. It's just the mind, it kind of imagines it's controlling things, you know, and part of it. And it's kind of like training wheels. You got to take the training wheels off eventually, and we ride just fine. That which we really are rides just fine. And so there's no reason, there's no need, let me put it this way, there's no need to really have to think and access mind for functioning to happen. It's just like, you know, when you're driving a car and you go offline for a while and you realize you're driving just fine, and you come back and go, whoa, I'm really glad that I got it, everything's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
It's kind
that's
of
a good
kind
analogy.
of a weird feeling sometimes. And it's like that. It's like that. But then you just live like that and you don't think about it, because like you said, self-referencing went away. The ability to, or maybe the desire, but the ability actually eventually just goes away, where the capacity to look at oneself and self-reference, and that is a mind capacity to bend on itself and to look at itself and create subject-object polarity through that mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sees itself as an object by bending and going, oh, this is me doing this. This is me thinking. I need me to do this. I need that mechanism. Me doesn't exist, but it's a mechanism of mind. And so for some reason with no self, I don't know, I think it's just an evolutionary leap, because I don't think that if we had a choice, we would choose to do this. It's kind of like really jumping into the abyss. But luckily, it's not you jumping anymore at that point. With unity, a lot gets dissolved. So that ability to self-reflect, which is self-referencing, gets clicked and never to return.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a big adjustment, you know, in a way, because it's kind of like the body-mind actually is the part of us that needs to adjust. It's like, really,
Yeah.
I can do these things without accessing the old way.
Jonathan, you mentioned earlier that some people would be frightened about losing the sense of the separate self. And in my case, it was never something that I was frightened about. It was something that I desired, because I came to the spiritual search out of feelings of depression and negative self-worth and a lot of other emotional problems, and it seemed to me that they all revolved around protecting my ego, not getting criticized, not getting into trouble. And so it seemed that, wow, wouldn't it be a marvelous solution to this if that ego that I'm protecting was somehow seen through.
Mm-hmm.
But my problem was that when teachers would talk about the separate self, and that losing the separate self, or that it's not really there, I realized that I equated the separate self with this body. And obviously this body is here. So it was hard for me to say, oh, it doesn't exist. And so I realized I may have been thinking about the separate self in the wrong way, not as the physical embodiment or the thing that's different from other people, but the point from which I experience the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if what you would say if the to someone whose experience of themselves is very much tied into their body being separate from other bodies.
Well, first of all, the only way that I would really speak with anyone about this is if they were truly interested, and
Yes.
if it was coming from a sincere place, and not just a mental desire to know, but, you know, like, because not to make it wrong to have a mental desire to know only, but the answer will come from a different place based on where they're coming from and their real sincerity. So if it's a real sincere wish to know, you know, what is it that falls away and what remains? I would feel into where they're at, you know, and maybe speak to the animal part, which is our body, you know, and speak to it in a way of bringing maybe peace, some calmness and peacefulness through understanding that the body remains and it's very intelligent and it already is the divine as it is. It's God made manifest. We're God made manifest. And that really what's happening and the invitation is to return back to our true nature, which is in harmony with life. And the falling away of the separate self is coming back to harmony, so that we feel that peacefulness and the oneness, you know, that is our birthright. And similar to a tree, I like to bring tree analogies in and nature analogies, that it knows what it is and it doesn't question it. It doesn't have, it's not complicated. And so we return back to a simplicity, an uncomplicated way. And it feels right. It's what we're meant to, how we're meant to live.
I love when you talk about the natural state, because that seems so true to me. That anger and depression and anxiety and stuff seems like all the stuff that's added on to the natural state. That's all the stuff that's sort of veiling it. And when we just return to just pure experiencing without an idea of how I'm supposed to be or how the world is supposed to be, that it settles somehow into a natural state, a kind of an original way.
Yeah, I think that's what we really long for, and we might call it this. I think that's really what spurs the spiritual journey in the first place, is we want to feel better. We intuitively know that something's wrong, off, and feels wrong. That's what is anxiety is a, you know, a side effect of that. Depression, not all of it, you know, but a good amount. I would say a good amount of feeling out of sync with with nature around us. It creates a lot of anxiety. Can you imagine if an animal in nature suddenly felt like it wasn't a part of its environment, and it just somehow got the virus that we have?
God forbid.
It would just be shaking, you know, and like, how do I survive? How do I do this? And how we do it is we learn a lot of coping strategies.
Right. Yeah, it's sometimes those strategies that are really getting in the way. And when we drop them, it seems that the natural state is just there waiting to be noticed and just waiting to embrace us and say, welcome back.
Sweet.
I also love the tree analogy. Sorry, Jonathan. I love that, because when you talked about that, I got this flash all of a sudden of, I couldn't imagine a tree going, am I really being a tree well? Are other trees going to judge me? How do I do this? No, it just trees.
Exactly. That's why nature is a wonderful teacher for us.
Yeah,
Hmm.
beautiful.
We brought up the subject of strategies, and I remember in my previous conversation with you uh, that you don't have very defined tools or strategies, but when you work with people, you kind of tune into them and help them to, say, soften whatever is keeping them from their natural state. Is that an accurate description?
Absolutely. I think that tools and strategies are sometimes valuable in the moment it's like the right medicine. It's kind of like if you have a splinter, you want a needle
Hmm.
or
Right.
tweezers, right? So, but if it's coming out of the intelligence of the moment, and it's like, this is what is useful right now. Why don't you try this for a while? But then eventually that wants to be let go of, and something else will present itself, or for a while maybe nothing, resting in the unknown. But strategies and tools are life's way of helping us along. But if we
Mm-hmm.
get addicted to them or afraid of letting things go out of fear, that's what's holding us together.
Hmm.
I mean, it's kind of like a baby bottle. I mean, it's like eventually has to be let go of. And yeah, so, for a baby, but there's the right medicine for the right time. And eventually all things can be let go of. And then the natural intelligence that we are is what is fully on board and guiding and directing. And we don't need any more tools and strategies to navigate this world that we are a part of.
I love that description, and it's one that I don't think a lot of spiritual seekers actually really get, because we get attached to our systems and our strategies and our tools, and it's very much in the moment what is needed now, and that can change many times a day, much less, over a 10-year period. But
Mm-hmm.
um, there's probably an art and maybe a science to being able to see what's needed, or maybe nothing's needed.
Exactly.
And I guess sometimes you kind of help people to do that in your sessions with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
it all arises from the moment, and being able to deeply tune in and listen to where someone's at, and
Mhm.
not just on the emotional human level or psychological human level, but on the spiritual evolutionary scale level, like where they're at and
Yeah.
what may be needed and what support may be good, not just to make them feel safe and comforted, but to also kind of help further, you know, kind of maybe keep moving in the direction of, if that's what they want. Yeah.
Mhm.
If that's really the heart's longing only, of course. But the great undoing, this is a great undoing that takes place.
Yeah.
Mm.
I recently talked to somebody who is I consider very awakened, and I asked her, do you have negative emotions? And her answer was kind of funny to me. She said, I don't really relate to the question. I don't relate to a you. I don't relate to have. And I don't relate to negative. Um,
Okay.
so I'm wondering, and I believed her.
Okay.
Hmm.
Uh,
Sure.
but I'm wondering how you relate to emotions, um, and yeah, what do we do with them? Because sometimes they can take us away for quite a while.
Something that I learned during the nice long unity phase, 8-9 years of unity. And that is making friends and peace and bringing everything kind of just returns back to the heart. Making friends and peace with the things that have been considered challenging, difficult, shadow, material, any of it. Because there always will be something that comes up, that comes out of the shadow, because we can't be aware of everything at once, all the time.
Yeah.
So unity really helps, and you don't have to be in unity to start this. But I like to call it, and I don't know if you've heard me say this with if you've heard any of my interviews or something, but I call it the path of inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what the heart does, which is the heart, it includes everything and realizes that that's a part of that, whatever it is, a difficult emotion or whatever, it is a part of itself. It's included. So it's not relegated to the shadows. It's not pushed away. It's not unwelcomed. So it's included through the heart. Now, the heart can also be intelligent and maybe realize, well, even though this is part of God, this confusion, this way of being, or the shadow, or maybe that's not how the best way to be in the world. It starts to view things with a lot with kindness. So by welcoming it and including it, it's able to help transform and alchemize it, a negative emotion, so-called negative, and realize it's just a confused piece, maybe a habit, and maybe something different would like to start to take place, another way of communicating, another way of being. So I see it as the transmutative process of the heart, of welcoming things just as they are, and then seeing what happens.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said.
I loved
Yeah.
when you talked about the inclusiveness, because I also find that true with emotions, that when they are included and welcome. And in addition to that, what else is included? Just the sensations of the body and the sounds and everything that's there. Emotions tend to take over and say, just pay attention to me and nothing else. But when it's just one of the things that's included in awareness, it somehow proportionally becomes less overtaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what you're pointing to me seems it's the vaster realm of the spaciousness that everything's arising and falling in.
Yeah.
So what is it that is including? Well, it's that which is all inclusive, right? It's that which has the space to include everything. So if you let yourself rest more and more in the space that allows, welcomes, then other things can take place because there's so much room.
Right. And then do you begin to identify with that all-inclusive, welcoming space and see that's really your true nature?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You realize that that's your true nature, and that these things, they're coming and going, and consciousness won't be hijacked and following this kind of noisy emotional experience, and it will realize that there's so much more going on, that's just happening within the space that we are, and we have more ability to have balance with it rather than be hijacked by it. Yeah.
I wonder if there's anything that you would like to convey to our listeners that we haven't touched upon, or you feel might be useful to them.
Well, I do feel like the path of the heart is very, very important to include in one's spiritual search. That it can get dry for a lot of people. And in that, I think people can be kind of hard on themselves and judge themselves and start to compare themselves to what awakening is supposed to look like. And rather than really start the inner work of allowing the heart to do the transmutative process. So what I would say is to put as much attention as possible during the day on the heart. Let the heart start to get activated. And it's an intelligence center. It's been proven. So let this intelligence center help dissolve, not just mind looking at itself and looking at beliefs, that can turn out very dry, and it can also create a lot of hierarchy. What's welcomed, what's not welcomed. A lot of duality can arise by having a spirituality that is primarily mind-oriented, because then we relegate things in the light and in the shadow, the dark, and this is welcome, this isn't, this is spiritual, this is something that needs to be gotten rid of. And then we can bounce around in that and not really progress very far.
Mm-hmm.
So if you activate the heart by placing attention here, it actually starts to get, like a generator starts to get going and purr like a cat, actually. It's really happy to be paid attention to. So then the driver's seat can fall here. Ramana actually pointed to that. He said, let your mind fall into the heart. Because the heart is a great navigation system. And it is that which reconciles duality.
Mm-hmm.
It is that which makes peace with polarity, with opposites, with the paradox. So the heart will look at something and it can still have, discrimination and say, no, I don't think I'll do that. No, I don't want to hang out with that person. Just because the heart is activated doesn't mean it's going to be a big, very relaxed puppy. I have a new puppy, so I'm thinking a lot about dogs and animals right now. Yeah, but it actually can be very discerning, but it can be discerning with love, even like love can be a no.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't close itself off and put it like no because that is bad and it rejects it. It's more like no and. It's more like no, and I think I'll go do this, and I'll put my attention here. But it transmutes really, truly. Like if there was an alchemizing stone, like of the ancients, they were talking about what is alchemy. It really is the heart, in this case, what we're talking about, the great transmuter.
I'm very glad I asked that question because that was a wonderful answer.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, it really was. And as you were talking about the heart, I said, okay, while I'm listening, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to put my attention and listen from there. And I invite all of our listeners to do that. If you want to listen to it again, just listen from that heart, from that spaciousness that dissolves duality, and experience it. And then you're out of the mind, you're out of the analytical self, and you're just pure experiencing. So beautiful. Thank you for that.
You're so welcome. It really does soften the doer,
Yeah.
And you mentioned one of my favorite heart opening techniques, which is my dogs. Every morning, including this morning, I do a little darshan where I kiss their snouts. I tell them how much I love them, and it's a really wonderful way to start the day. And it often brings tears to my eyes, and they seem to enjoy it as well.
Oh, I bet.
And I wrote a book called Conversations with Dog, Adventures of a Four-Legged Guru, because my dog has been really an instigator of being able to get out of my head and into my heart. And I think anything that we can do to do that is a good thing.
Jonathan, I just want to add to that, since you're talking about dogs, I thought this would be a great opportunity. One of my very dear friends, Bridget, who's a very wise person, says that if you're having a problem, ask yourself, is this a problem that a dog would notice you're having? In other words, if you're in physical pain, a dog would notice. If you're in mental pain about whether you're making a right or wrong decision, the dog is not going to be noticing that. So the real problems are just the problems a dog would notice you're having.
That's good. That's a good indicator.
Yeah, many of us are living with very spiritual beings. They just happen to have four legs.
Yeah, and oftentimes when if they get neurotic, it's because of the two-legged beings.
Exactly.
They inherit two-legged being neurosis.
Yes, I've seen that happen. But I've also seen them get over that when a new two-legged being comes into their lives. I've seen dogs completely heal from past trauma because the new owner is loving and caring.
I'm guessing that's how we are too. That if we are able to be in Sangha with two-legged beings who are more and more relaxing into their natural state, it creates a nice field for others to open to. I think that's what satsang is about. You know, the ideal of satsang is not to fill the head up with concepts, but to fill up the heart and our body, minds with the transmission that we can relax into this. We can trust it.
Well, I feel that in spending time with you, Susanne Marie, it's a blessing to
Thank you so much.
to have that transmission, that sangha, and reminders. And I hope our listeners also are tuning into that as well.
Well, I feel that with the two of you. I feel like it's a space we're sharing, and I'd love to tune into the audience, and we can all share in it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
At the end of our interviews, we often ask people if they can maybe share a short guided meditation that you think might be useful to folks. And if something comes up, now would be a good time for that.
Sure. Well, I was thinking maybe we'll do just a very simple breathing exercise in and out of the heart that people can maybe include if it resonates for them in their lives.
I think that would be lovely.
Great, thanks. I'd like to just preface it by explaining that it's a very powerful meditation, and it's good to practice it just a couple minutes to maybe 5 minutes, a couple times a day until you get more familiar with it, because it can actually start moving emotional content and whatever's in the way. So we want to be kind to ourselves. We don't want to be wimpy, but we don't want to over push and overstimulate. So somewhere in between. So people to really trust themselves for when they feel like that's enough, or maybe they would like a little more. Eventually you don't have to do it all the time, but it'll really activate the heart center, this breathing meditation. So I'm going to close my eyes, and I invite you to close your eyes as well. And gently place your attention on the heart area. Right? I would say just like right in the middle of the chest, so that we're including both sides of the chest, and the spiritual and the very human loving heart. So right in the middle. And imagine that right there in the middle of your chest, you have your nose, you have two nostrils right here. And when you breathe in, imagine that you're breathing into this heart center. And then when you breathe out, you're breathing out from the heart center as if you have your nose right here. And you breathe in. Nice, deep, relaxing, calm breath. And then breathe out. And continue. Breathing in and breathing out. And it might take some adjustment, of like, oh, how does this work? Just let yourself relax into it and breathe in. And breathe out. And continue. And you maybe feeling some things already starting to move, maybe a pleasant feeling. Maybe you can feel some layers of some pain can even arise, but just be very gentle. Breathing in. And breathing out. And I'll just talk a little bit more through it, but you can continue breathing in and breathing out. And in the air, just so you know, I'll speak so that you can include this in your meditation later on, this understanding that the air that's coming through and passing through your chest, it's stimulating little filaments, little areas of the heart and of the chest area, inviting things to open and for flow to happen. And depending on how protected the heart may be, or how open it may be in the moment, what kind of pain may be lying there on the human heart, all that will be invited to be released. Breathing in and breathing out. And what's being invited is the spiritual heart to start shining and supporting the human heart to let go of whatever coping strategies or protective mechanisms have been placed there in a very innocent and understandable way. Breathing in and breathing out. And then I'll bring in one more piece to this for if you'd like to include in the future. I wouldn't include it immediately because you want to be practicing this breathing in and breathing out exercise through the heart for a good while, a month or two or whatever. You can see how it feels. Maybe it will point organically when it's time to do part 2 of the exercise. And part 2, and maybe you can just try it just for now, just to see what I'm talking about. And then you can let it go. So you breathe in through the heart and then breathe out through the back of the heart. Imagine that there's a little trap door that's opened up. Breathing in and then you breathe out and it goes out the back. And then again, you breathe in through the front And out through the back. It has a very different feeling, doesn't it? So we'll just gently let that go now, just as a pointer for you for the future, not to limit, but just to allow the full fruition of this first exercise to really have its effect. And then part 2 can be brought in, and then you can play around and see what feels most natural to you. Let's again end with the first part of the exercise, breathing into the front of the heart, letting it stay there, and then breathing out the front of the heart. A few more times. See, then it has room to really fill up the chambers and see, and just get cozy and at home there, and then breathe out. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And you can bring this into your life, and it'll really start activating the heart center. Maybe you can feel it now. Feels really nice. And if you encounter anything, your audience encounters anything that is a little sticky, a little painful, you can do it gently and then let it go, and don't over activate. Let it digest during the day, and then maybe at the end of the day, try again for a while. Let's see if that is something that calls to you to try. Really activates the spiritual heart and helps release the whatever may want to be released in the content of the human heart.
Beautiful. I love its power and simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's a good tool.
Yeah. Well, if people want to get hold of you, the best way is through your website, SusanneMarie.org.
Yeah, and the way you say my name is Susanne,
Okay, Susanne.
but it is spelled with an E at the end, but it's German. So SUSANNE Marie.org is my website. And I have a contact page or connect page, and feel free to reach out.
It is a beautiful website, by the way, both in content and
Thanks.
just in the look of it and feel of it.
Thank you. I'm glad that you have that artistic appreciation of it. I had fun. With
Yeah.
it.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Thanks
It's
so much.
lovely.
Yeah.
Susanne, thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming and sharing your time and wisdom generously. It's just beautiful.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Really, really, it's nice to meet you, Brian. It's nice to see you, Jonathan, again. Yeah, really, really good to be with you. I really appreciated our time together and the questions and where we went. Very much.
Great.
So I'll just say, feel free to share this with your friends and family, and use the meditations and all the stuff about that, and keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.